Hi everyone, welcome back to our continual study of the Gospel of Luke here at St. Mark Presbyterian Church. We'd love to have you join us on Wednesday at 10 a.m. for a live discussion, either in person or over Zoom, or you can watch a recording of that discussion later. As you can see, we are now at the center point of our 5-week study. So we're on Luke chapter 16, verses 1 through 13. So first of all, thank you to all of you who have been joining us each week and responding in some way or another. I have to say that the text we're going to read today is probably one of the most difficult parables for biblical commentators, pastors, teachers, and readers of Scripture to wrap their heads around. We wonder if there's a degree of irony intended, or if there's just something there that we're not quite getting. So let's just read the text, and then I want to walk through a couple of challenges in reading the text with you. Starting with verse 1. Then Jesus said to the disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned him and said to him, 'What is this that I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer.' Then the manager said to himself, 'What will I do? Now that my master has taken the position away from me, I'm not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do, so that when I am dismissed as manager, people may welcome me into their homes.' So, summoning his master's debtors one by one, he asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' He answered, 100 jugs of olive oil.' He said to him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, make it 50. So then he asked another, 'And how much do you owe?' And he replied, 100 containers of wheat. He said to him, 'Take your bill and make it 80. And his master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in their dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into their eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in a very little is faithful also in much. And whoever is dishonest in a very little is dishonest also in much. If you then have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust you with true riches? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters. For a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth." This ends the reading. Thanks be to God. Okay, so as we come in on Wednesday, the very first thing we're going to do is just open up the floor and discuss what we think this reading is all about. What is this reading about? Why is it here? Why is it in the Bible, and why is it here in the Bible? Because you remember from last week, Luke chapter 15 is a story of 3 parables of things lost and found. 3 parables that Jesus told when the sinners and tax collectors were gathering around Jesus, and the scribes and Pharisees were grumbling about it. Jesus tells 3 parables, and then immediately tells this story. In the original text, there's no chapter division. That was added later, so this is actually the next parable, as it were. But there's a little bit of a change because Jesus is now speaking to the disciples. But why is it here? Why is it here after those 3 parables of lost and found? I would welcome any wisdom you have to share on that. And is this parable, or are parts of this parable, intended to be irony? Like, oh yeah, do this and you'll get that. Is it said with an eye roll? Is it said, yeah, this is how people act? What are you going to do? Is it that kind of a thing? Or are the commands really imperative? Is the commendation given to the dishonest manager a real commendation? Or do you have to consider the source? That's what I mean by irony. Is there something in the story itself that says, no, don't read this prescriptively, read this descriptively, because you know how that's how people act. We have to make those judgments, because the story, as you just heard me read it, simply just goes line by line. And if there is a tone of irony or sarcasm, a feint of some sort, we have to imagine that, because it's not in the words themselves. It's in the interaction we have with the words. So my question to you on Wednesday is not going to be all that. If you have some insight into any of that, I'd love it. But if you were on the committee that published the next edition of the Bible, and you wanted to break things up into paragraphs and begin each paragraph with a subtitle, as many of our Bibles do, what would be the subtitle that you would attach to this story? I really want you to think that question through and come to Wednesday's discussion, if you're going to be here, with some kind of an answer. If you can't be here, please feel free to email some kind of a suggestion to me. So let's look at how the story unfolds. There's quite a bit to it. I mean, first in verses 1 and 2, there's the charge of squandering. Now, there's also the setting. I have kind of overlooked that in some respects, where Jesus is speaking to the disciples. So we can talk about that on Wednesday. But it comes with a charge of squandering, that this money manager, the accountant, literally the economist, oikonomoi. It means the economist, or the law of the house is what the word economy means. So anybody who's taking care of the household ledger and so forth is what that term means. And it's typically translated economist, but because of the different forms that appear, it's kind of easier to go with the word manager, so you can talk about the management and so forth as the story unfolds and stay consistent. But there's a charge of squandering, and then the economist, the manager, responds. And then verses 5 through 7 show the examples of what the economist did. And then the wealthy person, who is first introduced at the beginning of the story, actually responds to what the economist did. And then we get a string of teachings in verses 9 through 13. So just so you'll know, I'm anticipating that it's going to take long enough to walk through verses 1 through 8, that we're going to save verses 9 through 13 for our discussion on Wednesday. So let's look at this charge of squandering. So there's a wealthy man who has a manager and who got a report that the manager was squandering his goods. There's a verb there that's kind of hard to translate, okay? He heard a report that the economist was squandering his money. And the verb there is diablese, you don't care. But what you might care is, we're trying to figure out what the root of that word is. It's obviously in the aorist passive form. That's what those last two letters signify. there are two resources that I use online to help with identifying the root word to some of the different forms in which it appears. And the two main sources that I use, one is GreekBible.com, the other is called TheBible.com. They disagree on what the root of this word is. One of them feels like it's the word diablepo. The word blepo means to see. It's one of the many words for seeing. So diablepo means to see through something or to see along with something. So if someone told the wealthy man about the economist's mismanagement, they could have helped the wealthy man to see what everybody else had seen. That would be the meaning of diablepo. But the resource that I trust more says that the root is actually diabalo. Balo, as many of you have heard, means to throw or to cast. So diabalo means to cast some words, cast a truth from one person to another. Diablepo would mean that someone let the wealthy man in on something he should know. Diabalo could be a false accusation. Somebody had thrown this accusation against somebody. Even if it's true, it possibly could be thrown against him out of spite. So the question is, when the wealthy man hears the accusation that the economist is mismanaging his funds, is it true? Is it not true? Or is it just sort of true, a mischaracterization of what the money manager is doing? You see, if it's true, then of course you just fire him and be done with it. If it's not true, you defend yourself and say, no, that's not what was going on, this is what was going on. If it's misunderstood, then you would explain, here is what I was doing. It may look like I was losing you money, but in fact, I was doing something that's beneficial. That's an interesting question. And the question arises, how do we characterize? Did someone simply let the wealthy man in on a secret of what was being hidden, that his money was being mismanaged? Or did someone lodge an accusation that may or may not be true, or at least not the full truth? That's a real question, and it's hard to answer in terms of translation, because this is a very kind of rare form of a verb, and it's hard to know exactly which verb it's reflecting. So you have a wealthy man. That's how he's described in the very beginning. Notice what he did. He heard charges. He calls the manager in. He asks, what are these charges I've heard? And he fires him. At least that's what it sounds like. Give an account of your management. You can no longer be my manager. It sounds like he's firing him. And the question is he asking for the books back when he says, give me an account of your management? The word translated account is literally the word logos, which means word. Give me a word of your management, for you can no longer be my manager. So is he asking for the books back? You know, a way of saying, clear out your locker, give me your stuff, you're out of here. It doesn't look like the firing is immediate, but maybe. Or is he just threatening him? Show me what's going on here, because you can't be my manager if I don't know. It's kind of hard to know what the wealthy man is asking for exactly. Does he want to verify the charges, or does he simply believe them and he's firing this guy on the spot? We have a parable, and in that parable is a wealthy man. The word later used to describe him will be master, and it's interesting, that's the translation that our Bible has for the word kurios, which typically is translated Lord. Lord, when did we see you naked? Lord, when did this? Lord, that. Lord Jesus, the Lord. Almost any time it's associated with Jesus or God, it's translated Lord. But it doesn't necessarily have a meaning of deity to it. It's a lot like the Spanish word Señor, which would simply be a term, an honorific term of somebody who holds power over someone else. But the reason I bring that up is a lot of times when we hear parables, we are tempted to see all of the people of authority, whether it's a landowner, a king, a judge, a ruler, a house owner, in this case, a master. We typically see them in these parables as an allegory for God. And I think that's often a mistake. So I just want to say, this wealthy man, let's not imagine that just because he's the one with all the power to make judgments and to issue punishments, that he's necessarily an allegory for God in this parable. I would be very, very cautious about doing that. So verses 1 and 2, honestly, that insofar as they set the table for the parable, there are a lot of questions that come up there. And we'll take some time with that on Wednesday. In verses 3 and 4, the manager responds. And initially it says, and he said to himself, what will I do? What will I do? I can't lose my job. I'm too weak to dig and have too much pride to beg. What will I do? Now, verse 3 says he's speaking to himself. What I want to invite you to do is look at your Bible and ask yourself, when does that internal dialogue stop? Does it stop with verse 3, verse 4, verse 5, 6, and 7? At what point does the internal dialogue stop? I want you to make a judgment on that. I think we presume that it stops with verse 4, but I want you to ask yourself whether that's the case or not. Okay, he says in verse 4, I have decided what to do. And this is where the parable in itself becomes a little tricky. It sounded at first like the wealthy man fired him on the spot. Give me an account of your management. Give me the books, because you can no longer be my manager. Sounds like he fired him on the spot. If that's the case, then verses 4, 5, 6, and 7 don't quite work, because it almost sounds like that's what this guy is doing on his way out the door. So he didn't turn in his computer and his account books and his key to the locker and all those things right away. The way we typically hear this parable and the way it's often represented is that he's been told he's losing his job, and he runs quickly and strategizes what to do, because he certainly can't dig or beg. And here's the problem. The verb that's translated, I have decided what to do, that verb is actually a past tense, a simple past tense verb. I decided what to do. It's actually talking about a past event. It's not. Unless there's just some very tricky Greek stuff going on here, it really shouldn't be that the guy is currently thinking, I'm in a pinch, what should I do? Here it is, I've decided to do this. It's a simple past tense. And so I want you to go back and read it and think, what if he is, starting with verse 3, now starting with verse 4, what if he's now giving an account of his management to the wealthy man, telling him, he knows in himself, what do I do? I can't lose this job. I can't dig, and I won't beg. And so he tells the truth. And the truth is, he looks at his master and says, I decided to do these things so that when the occasion comes that I lose my job, and that happens, they would take me into their homes. I was currying favor with your clients so that when the time came and I no longer had this job, I had somewhere to turn. That's one possible way of reading this, that verse 4 begins the account. The way we typically read it is that verses 3 and 4, he's still talking to himself. He's saying, what do I do? Oh, here's a plan. I'll do this. So how you read verses 3 and 4 makes a big difference. And the idea is that by doing these things, they will take me into their homes when I lose my job. We're going to see another reference to that in verse 9, when make friends by means of dishonest wealth, so they will welcome you into their eternal homes. So that's a strategy, folks, a biblical one at that, unless it's our enemy. All right, then we get to verses 5, 6, and 7. And in verses 5, 6, and 7, here's what the manager is doing. First of all, he calls in debtors, and we get two examples. There could be many, many more. We get two examples of the debtors that whose accounts he has been overseeing. So now we know something about the wealthy man. The wealthy man is wealthy because he has lots of debtors. He lends money, he offers credit, and he has people indebted to him. You can go back in the Old Testament and see plenty of reasons why this is not what God's people are supposed to be doing. If someone owes you a lot because, let's say, you made a loan with interest, you're actually not supposed to charge interest to your fellow Jews. So anybody who does is actually violating the law in doing that. The Old Testament economy of God is an economy of abundance where there's enough for everybody, and so there are laws against accumulating too much wealth. Woe to you who join field to field. That's a smart economic strategy in many people's minds, is if your crop is doing well, you take some of the excess money that you have and buy more land so you can have bigger crops that they can do well. So you'll have more excess money and buy more land. And it's accumulate. People were doing that in the New Testament. They were doing it in the Old Testament. And the prophets would come and say, what are you doing linking field to field? You are accumulating more than you need, and others therefore don't have what they need. So you have an economy of abundance that's built on everybody having enough. And one of the detours, one of the ways that people were living out of sync with God's economy of abundance is through debt. And that's why debt is such a big deal in the Gospels. It was ruinous. It's the reason why many people no longer lived on their familial lands. They had to give their lands, sell their lands, because they were indebted. Most farmers in the greater Palestinian area were tenant farmers on the land that used to belong to their family, but had been appropriated because of debt. And now they're paying someone to work their own land, what should be their own land. No jubilee, no 7 years of forgiving loans, no every 50 years giving back lands that had been lost to debt. That whole jubilee economy was no longer in service. And now you have a debt economy. And when we get this certain wealthy man, that's why he's wealthy. He has people who owe him debts. So the manager, who's been following his accounts, calls in the debtors. The first How much do you owe? He's 100 barrels of olive oil. And he says, sit down, write out 50, and we'll be good. So 50 cents on the dollar, he allows him to settle that account and escape that debt. Is that a good thing, or is that a bad thing? It might be a good thing if you're thinking in terms of the Jubilee economy of abundance. It might be a bad thing if you're thinking in terms of the person for whom he's working, who's depending on getting not just 50 barrels of oil, but 100. Is he forgiving interest? Is he allowing someone to continue their life without always living under the scourge of debt? Or is he doing his master a disservice? That's a real question. The next person comes in and says, what do you owe? He says, 100 bushels of wheat. And he says, sit down and write it out for 80, and we're good. So, he's doing two things. Number one, he's forgiving debts, but also settling accounts. It's not like saying, well, we'll write it all off. He doesn't go that far. But he does do pennies to the dollar as a way that they can settle their account and still not have to extend it because it's too much debt. So he's doing that on the one hand. On the other hand, he's not extracting every bit of money that he can for his manager. So the question is, what is this fire sale all about? Is he doing the right thing? Is he doing the wrong thing? Think carefully before you answer that, because if you're indebted, you might think, oh, this is a great thing to do. Jubilee economy is wonderful. If you are a loaner and people are indebted to you, you might feel like this is fraud or theft. And you might think this guy very well deserves to be fired. So it's kind of interesting. The last thing I want to point out with the oil and the wheat is that these oil and wheat are two words within a trilogy of words that appear together very, very often in the scriptures. And particularly when the scriptures are talking about God's economy of abundance. It's usually oil, wheat, and wine. Or sometimes in its native form, olive trees, grain fields, and vineyards. You'll see those three things appearing together over and over and over again. Bread, wine, and oil. Bread, wine, and oil. Look at the 104th Psalm. You'll see that bread is there to strengthen the human heart. Wine is there to gladden the human heart. Oil is there to make the face shine. So bread gives you the ability to live, to survive. Wine gives you the ability to express joy. The pursuit of happiness, it might be called. And oil had that cosmetic, health-related quality to it. Oil was what you put on wounds. Oil was how you kept something from festering, from drying out. It also made the face shine. The cosmetic section is always next to the health section in the store, the health and beauty section. That's what oil was all about. And in God's economy of abundance, everyone has access to food, to mirth, and to health. So in this parable, we get two of those three words, and sometimes all three of them appear together, sometimes just two. You and I have a very strong central symbol of God's economy of abundance when we share bread and wine at the table. That's the wheat, and those are the vines. And so it's part of that trilogy of words that appears over and over again. I think it's not insignificant. They don't owe him boats. something, random like that. These are words that are drawn from the economy of God's abundance. And now it's part of the economy of debt. And now they're being forgiven. And that's what the manager has done. Now, either he did that because he's mismanaging, or he did that because he's making the best for everybody. In the next verse, the wealthy man responds. And this is one of the verses where he's called master or kurios. But again, I don't think that automatically means he's a type for God. It is just a title of an honorific title. The manager here is called the dishonest manager in our translation. The word is adikias. Dike is the word for justice. Dike with the God of justice. And so dike is the word for justice. The prefix a, means not just, the unjust manager. Now, he's unjust. Is he unjust because he's going against God's justice? Or is he unjust? Is this an ironic term because he's not doing what the master would love for him to do, which is extract every dollar possible from the debtors? So the question is the dishonest steward, is the unjust manager, is this an ironic term? Was he actually doing the right thing? Because honestly, the wealthy man admires him for acting shrewdly. So if he is unjust, the owner, the master, the wealthy man whose money he's just written off to his debtors, this man admires what he does. Says he acted shrewdly. That's a term that's not used very much. It means, it could be translated wisely. Is this grudging approval? Is this irony? Is he like, yeah, that was kind of smart. I hate it, but it was smart. Is this irony? Or is he saying, you know what, that really was the right thing to do? Hard to say. And then in the middle of verse 8, you have a transition from the end of the parable to a moral. So the master saw what the dishonest man had done and said he had acted shrewdly. And then you have the word for, which leads to the moral, that the children of this age act more shrewdly in this generation than the children of light. So now you have a real dichotomy here. You've got children of this age who really know how to get by in this world, and they know how to get by shrewdly. And the children of light, who one would think that's a good thing, you're the children of light, but you just don't know how to play the games that are at work in this world. The children of light are too naive, too honest to get by and to take advantage of the way things are. That seems to be the first moral of the story. And then it's followed by a string of teachings which also seem to be morals of the story. We're not going to take the time to look at these because we're out of time, but it's about making friends with dishonest wealth. Ironic or not ironic? It's about being faithful or dishonest in little things and therefore in much things. Faithful or dishonest in today's wealth of this generation or true wealth. Faithful or dishonest with other people's things or one's own things. Faithful or dishonest. You have to either love God or money, wealth, mammon. That's how it ends. So, it's a difficult parable. There's a lot to work through still. I probably have done nothing more than just confuse you further with this video. but I want you to appreciate all the intricacies that make this difficult. And on Wednesday, I want to ask you, what should be the subtitle that precedes this parable in the Bible? So I'll see you then. Thank you. Bye.